Hey guys, Darren from ProtoPie here. So this is the second part in my 3-part tutorial showing you how to create Facebook stories. Okay, so now we want to detect when the whole story bar is completed because we want to move on to the second story. So to do that, we're going to come over to our triggers panel and we're going to add another detect trigger. And unsurprisingly, we're going to target progress fill 1 again. Choose that here. And again, unsurprisingly, we want the width property. So within this detect trigger, we want to add a condition. So I'm going to put a condition block in here. And again, you want to make sure that progress fill 1 is selected. And again, we want the width property. Okay, so we want to do a different condition this time. So we want to know when the progress bar is completed. So we just want to know when the width equals the width of the progress bar, which, if you remember, is 349 pixels here. Okay, so we're just going to set the width. We'll leave the equality operator selected, and we're just going to type in 349. Okay, so that's going to effectively detect when the progress bar finishes. Now we need to actually scroll on to the next story. Okay, so within this condition, we're going to add a scroll response. And we want this scroll response to target the carousel container. Okay, so we're going to choose the carousel. That's the one that's got the paging effect applied to it. And within this scroll response, we've basically got the ability to scroll that carousel to any point. Okay, so again, we know the width of our screen is 375. So we want to scroll 375 to get to the next story, which is sitting over here on the right hand side. So we're going to scroll to, going to leave it as scroll to and just type 375 in here. And I'm just going to make the duration slightly longer. I'm going to make it 0.33. Feel free to play with the timings there. Cool. So let's just review. We've detected when the progress bar reaches the end, so when it's completed. And when it's completed, we're going to scroll to this next story. So let's just preview that. Make sure that's all working properly. Okay, so we got the first part happening. Okay, so we're scrolling up, hitting the third story. And then when we hit the end of the bar, we can see that we've auto-advanced onto the next story. Okay, but you can see that the progress bar isn't moving. So we need to basically make that progress bar in the second story actually start counting up. Okay, so let's get that progress bar, the second progress bar working. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to copy the scale response from the start trigger here, and we're going to paste it into this condition here. So just below the scroll condition, because this first scale is already set up to exactly what we need it to be. We just need to change a few things inside of it. So for one, we need to change it to progress fill 2 because we need to affect the second progress bar. Progress fill 2 there. And because the second story is only a single image, we don't want it to be on screen for 20 seconds. We're just going to change the duration to 10 seconds. You can change it to whatever you want. Actually, I might change it to 7 seconds. Okay, so that should basically take care of the second progress bar working. Let's give that a preview, make sure that's working. Okay, so we should probably speed this up just so we can get through as quick as, but we're going through the individual images in the first story. So that's, as we've seen already, that's all working. Feel free to fast forward through this part of the video. And then when we hit the second story, then we can see that the progress bar is counting up, but it's counting up much faster because we've only set it to be 7 seconds. Okay, that's all working as expected. Cool. So the next job for us to do is we want to basically account for when the user actually interacts with the scrolling. So basically when the user takes over the auto scrolling. And we want to do a few things. First of all, we need to think about, when I scroll back to the first story, where we left it off was on the third image. So we need to reset that back to the first image. And we also need to reset the progress bar as well. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing next. Okay, so in this part of the video, we're going to be accounting for the manual scrolling. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is going to add a detect trigger. And with that detect trigger, we're going to target the carousel. And again, this time we want the carousel scroll property. Okay, within this detect, we're going to add a condition. And in this condition, you want to make sure that your carousel is targeted. And again, we want to choose the scroll property. That's the one we're interested in. And within this condition, we're going to leave it as equals. And we want to see when it equals 0. So when it equals 0, we want to restart progress bar 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this scale response from the start trigger. I'm going to copy that and we're going to paste that inside this condition we just created. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to reset progress bar 2 also back to 0, because obviously we've already manually gone to the second story and now we're kind of going back, or maybe we even auto scrolled to the second story, but we want to scroll back. So let's set progress bar 2 back to 0. So again, within this condition, I'm going to add a reset response. Reset responses are really good. They reset all of the properties of a layer back to its original state when the prototype or the scene loaded. Okay, and we're going to target our progress fill 2 here. Next up, we need to detect when the user scrolls to story 2. So we need to basically detect that there has been some manual intervention. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this condition and we're going to change the value in this to 375. So that corresponds to our second story. We're going to go into this scale property and we're going to change the target to progress fill 1. Sorry, progress fill 2. And again, I'm going to change the duration to 7 seconds. Now we need to go back and reset progress bar 1. So we need to account for progress bar 1 as well and reset that. So we're going to change this reset here that we've got in this duplicate condition to progress fill 1. Okay, so that's taken care of all the progress bars. So remember, we're manually overriding the automatic stuff, and we've just basically set all the progress bars to reset in all of the different scenarios. So whether we're going from story 1 to story 2, or from story 2 back to story 1. But the final thing that we haven't done is we haven't reset all of the images in the first story. So we're going to do that next. Cool, so let's create the resets on the story images here. So within this same condition, I'm going to add an opacity response. And I'm going to target the first image. So that's media 1, stories media 1. And remember, we use opacity to hide them. So I just basically want to set the opacity back to 100. Now, there's a slight bug in ProtoPie just in terms of the way different things get triggered. So we've got a little fix we need to kind of make this work properly. So on this opacity, I just need to delay it by 0.1 of a second. Okay, this is a bug fix. This is just basically to make sure that it triggers. Otherwise, it won't always trigger. And then when you go back to that story, you will find that the image hasn't shown. It hasn't gone from 0 opacity to 100. Okay. So with that fix in place, we're going to duplicate this opacity. And we're going to change the target here to stories media 2. Remember, we don't know at what point the user has manually changed from story 1 to story 2. So we're just going to account for it all. So we're just going to assume that story 1 has been made invisible and story 2 has also been made invisible. So with that in place, we should now have accounted for all the different scenarios and all the different things we need to turn back on when the user is taking over manual control. So let's open up preview and give it a test. Okay, so at least the benefit this time is we don't have to wait for this to happen, but we're just going to wait till we get past the first image so we can make sure this is working properly. So I'm now going to scroll to this next story. We can see that this is starting. I'm now going to scroll back to the first story. And you can see indeed that the first image is now showing and the progress bar has been reset to 0. Okay, so functionally now, we've got all the Facebook stories bits in place in terms of how the progress bar counts up through these 3 images, how it auto scrolls to the next story, and then we've also added the ability to manually change between the 2 stories. But at the moment, as you're probably acutely aware, it's all very 2D and we want to make it 3D. So in the final video, I'm going to show you how to do the 3D effect.